Kia ora, hola, kia rana, talofa, maloalele, and welcome to another week of Tūpālangi in a Piece and Easy Pod, the podcast designed for business people in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, doing business across the Pacific. I'm Glenn Murphy, and I'm thrilled to be here with my mate Dave to talk about the exciting stuff that's happening in the business world across the Pacific and to talk to Pacific business people.
And hello, Olgeta, kia rana koutou katoa toa. I'm Dave Dewar, currently based in Rarotonga, but previously based in Suva. And I've been working with Glenn across the Pacific for the past 5 years. We've really loved telling the stories of Pacific businesses and the fantastic opportunities and people that are making things happen in this dynamic region. Glenn and I have worked together since 2020, and we're really enjoying telling Pacific business stories now through this weekly podcast.
And in this episode, we're going to focus on the movement of people across the Pacific. We're going to look at some of the latest tourism numbers, what that means for some pressures in the region, including infrastructure. We'll talk about Vanuatu and their immigration policy, as well as announcements about the redevelopment of Air Vanuatu. What will the US visa bond mean for business people? And not so sure this is about movement of people. It might be, but we'll also just mention the New Zealand election date. But first, Dave, we need to start on a bit of a sad note and acknowledge another disaster in our region with the recent weather events in Aotearoa, New Zealand, causing slips in the Tauranga region in particular, and that's affected property and, of course, very sadly, lives, especially the slip at Mount Maunganui. Our thoughts and araha go out to anybody that's been impacted by those weather events, and particularly around the Mount. Dave, I think you have property in that area, so you've probably felt it quite directly, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. Really horrendous to see what's been happening in Mount Maunganui. Such an iconic destination and a happy place for so many Kiwis and visitors to the country around this time of year. So, really terrible weather events across a lot of that North Island and resulting in that tragic slip that's claimed the lives so far of some, and with search still underway for others, hoping and praying for all of the best, I think, that can possibly happen.
But let's move on now, Dave, and let's tell Anoa about the week of Pacific business, where, as always, there just seems to be a lot going on, quite a lot of announcements. And we talked that this episode is going to be about movement of people, so might be a good thing perhaps to start with a bit of a review of some of the tourism numbers that have come out this week, I think, in Fiji and the Cook Islands in particular, Dave.
Yeah, exactly, Glenn. I think we've mentioned in previous episodes that this week Fiji has just held its tourism summit and conference, and really hoping to have on the show in the coming weeks some of the people that were leading that, and people like our friend Jenny Sito, who was the chair of the tourism conference up in Denarau last week, but also some of the operators and representatives of the industry. The reason it's topical at the moment is, of course, January. It's the start of a new year, and all of the data has now come in for the December quarter, but also month, and then therefore the year. And there's been some, as expected, really impressive growth in both of those sectors. So the two ones that we know closest, of course, is Fiji and Cook Islands, and both of those markets have had record years for tourism. Fiji didn't quite crack 1 million. That still remains slightly elusive, but they had, I think, 986,000 visitors, so they're super close to that 1 million tourist mark. And it's really showing that that's kind of not quite bursting at the seams, but very close, I think. And one of the challenges that Fiji's always talked about is its shortage of rooms. I think when I was there a year or so ago, they were talking about a shortfall of around 5,000 rooms that need to be met to accommodate that number of people. But the other point that was made, I think, at the conference, which we'll hopefully hear from in a future show, was around the increase in tourism earnings and spend. And I think the headline that was reported in the Fiji Times today was an additional 501 million that's come into the country in the September quarter. and that's about a 7.5% increase on the spend from the year previously. So that's a combination of people staying longer, people paying more for their rooms. Anyone who's stayed in Fiji in the last couple of years will know that it's quite expensive, and only getting more so, and spending more on some of the activities and food and other things while they're there.
Yeah.
And Cook Islands
So
has had a very similar one.
Sorry, just Dave, before we move on to the cooks, just with Fiji, I know
Yeah.
a couple of the conversations we've had lately, have talked about unashamedly Fiji becoming a more luxury, high-end tourism destination than perhaps it typically or historically has been seen as. And so I'm assuming that some of the data that you're talking about there in terms of spend and actual revenue are really a reflection of that movement.
Yeah, I think so. It's it'll be interesting to unpick what's driving that, whether it's the same sorts of people staying for longer and paying more for the same experience, or whether it's a value add that's genuinely kind of crept in and they've been able to move up a price bracket. So, one of the drivers that I think is common across the Pacific over the last few years, certainly since COVID, has been, it's almost, I reckon, benefiting from the, the challenges that are afflicting the rest of the world. And certainly for the core source markets of, in Fiji's case, Australia and New Zealand. But you're seeing growing numbers from the North American and European markets. That is generating, I think, or being caused by some of the challenges that you're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere. So people that otherwise would have done a holiday to Europe or to North America or perhaps the Middle East are seeing some of the, global disruption that's occurring in those parts of the world and are choosing to holiday closer to home. So increased demand, maybe a growing pool of people that would have, otherwise gone elsewhere. And that, I think, is just being reflected in a higher price point because the supply of rooms and things has remained relatively static in Fiji and across the region.
And again, I guess something we've talked about a little bit, and particularly in relation to Fiji, is the opportunity for business that's there as that whole tourism industry modernizes their practice and expects a higher level of service, a strong level of product supply, particularly, things like the food and beverage, food service trade. So it's a continuation of that direction, I guess.
It flows through to so many parts of the economy. I think people talk about tourism accounting for anywhere between 40 and 60% of Fiji's GDP, and I'm sure it would be very similar for tourism-reliant economies like Cook Islands, French Polynesia, and even places like Vanuatu, which we'll come to later on. It's everything. It's the food, it's the machinery, it's the servicing, but also it's the rental accommodation for people that are living there. I was talking to a very good friend here in Cook Islands just yesterday, who's a listener to the show, and he'll know who I mean. But he was talking about how pre-COVID, people thought he was mad for paying something like $250 a week in rent over here because that was so high. And now people can't believe that he gets away with paying only $450 in rent. So you're seeing that rental market absolutely increase because so many, people have come in to either Airbnb properties or to work in the tourism industry, and that's driving up, demand for houses and so forth. So that's being reflected in kind of rental markets as well. It affects everything. I was chatting to another very senior business leader quite recently who mentioned that his business was looking to invest in a new plane, and that's being driven completely by tourism numbers across the region. You see some of the investment that Fiji Airways is making, and of course that'll segue nicely into our conversation later about Air Vanuatu because air travel is so critical to the continued success of this industry.
Yeah. So Dave, let's move to the Cook Islands and tourism there. And you started just to talk about the tourism numbers, but I imagine the structure of tourism in the Cooks is a bit different than it is for Fiji. Is it how would you describe the development of that industry and where it's at?
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison, really. I think Fiji, those who have visited and experienced the tourism offerings there will know that a lot of it uh, revolves around these large-scale resort type experiences. You go into the resort, you tend to stay at the resort. I think the average length of stay in Fiji is something like 6 to 7 nights. In Cook Islands, by contrast, they say that and it's a neat sort of phrase that they use. Your destination is not your accommodation. Your destination is the island itself. And so it's much more of what I would sort of call a Kiwi style holiday. You come, you stay in a place, and then you leave that place and go out and experience all of the offerings that the island has. So you see people on the scooters. There's a recent new business that started up here, run by a couple of friends of ours who are offering tuk-tuks. So they call them the cook-tuks. And you're seeing those. That's the one buzzing around the island at the moment. They look super cool. But people are going to places like Charlie's restaurants. They're going to the social centre. They're buying fish and chips out of the caravan. They're having that on the beach, and they're kind of shopping around and experiencing the entire island. So the accommodation market's slightly different. There are some large scale properties similar to a slightly smaller Fijian type resort, but a large number of people stay in smaller villas. They stay in Airbnb type accommodation. They self cater for some of the nights, and then they'll go out and they'll eat out. But what that means is that there's a much broader pressure on the overall accommodation stock in the country. And so where you get these sort of economies of scale in places like Fiji, and you can have these large scale resorts, think Denarau and others that can invest in big, infrastructure to support that those numbers, like a large scale, wastewater treatment system or energy system to power that. In Cooks, I think the pressure gets dispersed a lot more across the system, and particularly acute in kind of the wastewater system. And there have been and there are, I think, sort of concerns and fears about what that does with a whole lot of predominantly septic systems, how they cope with the added influx of people, because the numbers are wild.
Yeah.
Fiji is roughly a 1-to-1 tourist ratio, but Cook Islands is almost 20-to-1.
Is that right? Gosh, did not know that.
Yeah, so Cooks has had a record year as well. They welcomed 187,000 tourists last year. And when you think that the population of Rarotonga is around about 12,000 people, that's a huge difference. So
yeah, and how do local people feel about that? I mean, is there a mixed feeling? Because often you get this thing of, well, it is actually our economic power, but at the same time, this is our home. So how is that felt about in the Cooks?
Yeah, very. That's exactly the way to put it. I think there'd be a very wide range of views on that. Similar to New Zealand, right? We've had very, very similar debates, and still will have debates about that impact of tourism. So at one level, it's fantastic, and you've got an incredible welcome and a pride that people have in showcasing their culture, the beauty of the place, and all of the incredible things that there are to do. And it's really special, having people from New Zealand, from Australia, wanting to come and experience all of that the country has to offer, and bringing and spending a lot of money to do that in the country. On the other hand, it creates an impact, and it creates an impact that is borne by the businesses and the people that have to call the place home. So, your challenge, I think, is capturing the revenue as best you can, making sure that the money that's brought here stays here, and supports the critical infrastructure that's needed to continue that growth of the tourism industry. And I think, just as we do in New Zealand, making sure that the value is as high as it can be for the product that you can offer.
Dave, this you may not have researched this, so this may be putting you on the spot, but are there many links in terms of the actual operation of tourism facilities between New Zealand and the Cooks? Like, are New Zealand tourism operators heavily involved there?
Absolutely, Glenn. I think if I just took a a quick snapshot of the people that I see each week at the golf club or in other parts there's a huge number of Kiwis who operate properties here, who are very active in the tourism industry. Very well-known figures like Sir Ewan Smith, who founded Air Rarotonga and was knighted last year in the New Zealand honours system. A hugely prevalent Kiwi diaspora, operating in the country, increasing numbers of Australians as well. And I think the other thing is that there's that incredible cookie diaspora in New Zealand and Australia too, who, many of whom come back to operate businesses, to give back, and to reconnect with their own heritage and country, and that's important, right? Because the other aspect to this is that you can't own land in the Cook Islands unless you are a Cook Islander. And you have that sort of ancestral connection. And so a lot of the tourism businesses that operate here do so on a leasehold basis, or they've got a local, Cook Island citizen who's a director of the business. And so that whakapapa connection is very critical to sort of doing business here and operating effectively.
Yeah, cool. Hey, let's move on, Dave. And under this theme that we've got this week of movement of people, we also wanted to talk a little bit about Vanuatu and some of the things that are happening there. And I know you've been having a little bit of a look into some of the movement regarding migration in Vanuatu. So you've got some interesting data from that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. I think, Vanuatu is a really interesting country, and for a lot of reasons, but particularly on this phenomenon, because at one level, just like a Fiji or Cook Islands, tourism has historically and in the future will continue to play a very significant role in the country's economic trajectory and development. And a huge plug for Vanuatu. If anyone's listening to this and has not visited, I'd really encourage you to. It is stunningly beautiful. And there are, heaps of incredible things that you can do, not just on places like Efate, which is the main island, but also, in some of the many other of 83, I think, islands in the whole country. So it's also impacted by the other type of people movement in the region, which is labour outflow. And Vanuatu has always traditionally been one of the largest sending countries to schemes like the New Zealand RSE, the Regional Seasonal Employer Scheme, as well as the Australian PALM scheme. And that's been, I guess, a bit of a double-edged sword for both of these, for countries like that, because while, people are making a lot of money out of going away and working in places like New Zealand and Australia and sending those remittance flows back, it also impacts the local economy from not having them as part of the productive workforce. And I remember, and unfortunately I haven't been able to find the document, but the Vanuatu Chamber of Commerce and Industry led a discussion on this a couple of years ago, and I remember reviewing that document and talking about just the size of that impact. And, Vanuatu has a total population of something like 300,000 people, maybe just a little bit less. And each year on the seasonal labour schemes, there's something like 20-odd thousand that are leaving. So that's, 10% of the total population, or just under rather, heading away on these schemes. And of course, when you dig into the demographics of that, that's they tend to be male and with the working age male population. So a really, really big chunk of that productive workforce heading off island each year to work in New Zealand and Australia. And I think, some of the impact that has on local industries like, Vanuatu's agriculture industry, for example, it's traditionally been a place that's been famous for its beef production. And seeing the decline that has occurred over recent years, which is not entirely, but certainly partially attributable to the challenges of sourcing labour in the country.
Yeah. Hey, the other thing while we're talking Vanuatu, I mentioned to you that I'd noticed this week was the continuing development around Air Vanuatu. And, we talk about movement of people and tourism. Well, the airlines are a particularly important part of that. And, we know that Air Vanuatu's had some relatively tough times of late, but the government, and seems to be led by the Minister for Finance, is really driving the redevelopment of Air Vanuatu as quite a high priority. And they've addressed some of their governance. They've appointed some new directors as of late last year. They've got a new, I think, interim CEO, but new CEO involved. They've purchased a couple of new planes that are coming, and they're also in the midst now of a very fast review of their whole operation and financial settings. So some quite big developments going on there, and they're looking ahead at some hopefully new purchases as well. Very much focused, from what I can see, on domestic air travel rather than traveling outside of the nation. But within that, clearly trying to also connect up with international players and make sure, that they have those links that will bring tourists into the country.
Yeah, absolutely critical, I think, Glenn, and fingers crossed that they can make that happen. What you've just sort of outlined, I think, illustrates two things about why air travel is so critical. Firstly, it's getting people to the country, and so you need those predictable and affordable and regular connection in and out from your source markets like Australia and New Zealand, and that was a particular challenge, I think, for Air Vanuatu in the past. I think it had one jet that was able to kind of service one route at a time. And they had another connection in from Air New Zealand for a long period of time, and that Air New Zealand relationship sadly sort of fell away for a period. I think there were issues around the runway at Port Vila. I understand, the runway has now been reconstructed, but that kind of connection with Air New Zealand hasn't returned. So in the meantime, you've had Solomon Airlines actually stepping in to fill that gap. And, if no one's traveled on Solomon Airlines before, it's a great airline. I've traveled on it several times. It's good. It's a really high standard of service. And they've got a couple of jets that are basically, one's running, I think, east-west, and one's kind of running north-south. And one of the headlines I saw this week was that Solomon Airlines is going to be looking at running a service from Christchurch to Port Vila. Yeah, later this year. So from about June, I think. So anyone listening in from the South Island of New Zealand and contemplating a very cold winter may want to give Vanuatu a look, and you can get direct out of there with Solomon Airlines later in the year. But the other point that you mentioned, because about transiting between islands, like many Pacific Island countries, Vanuatu's got a whole heap of islands.
Yeah.
83, I think, in Vanuatu.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, the reason I know that actually is because there's a distillery in Vanuatu called 83 Islands, which is a top notch gin and rum producer. So one to look out for if you get there. They also do like a limoncello. But getting to Vanuatu is one thing, but actually while you're there, the ability to get from one island to another, so to get up to Luganville, Santo, down to places like Tanna with the incredible volcanic activity there, you really need a smaller airline to be able to service that. And so tourism can help support the economics of it, but it also provides a critical service, right? So if you're a Vanuatu citizen living on one of these outer islands and you need, to travel to the capital for medical or educational or work, having that domestic air connection from, some of the smaller players is really critical as well. And that's one of the challenges I think that many Pacific airlines have to face. They have to serve both of these two industries, which run on very different, economic drivers. And they're tricky businesses to run. And, we've seen some of the challenges that Air Vanuatu has faced. And so, yeah, I think it's in everyone's interests really in that country, but also across the region that they succeed.
Yeah.
Definitely a space to watch.
I don't know. It's obviously a different scale, but you'd have to, if you were an airline operator in the region, you'd have to be looking at Fiji Air and just thinking, "Gosh, what can we learn from them?" Because they just seem to have been on such a great roll over the last few years. Picking up awards and just doing a terrific job.
Yeah, no, Fiji Airways has been on a real tear, haven't they? And I think huge credit to the previous CEO, Andre Filluin, and his incredible team. It's been an incubator for some of the best in Fijian business as well. And a
Yeah,
recollection of our chat last week with Joseph Vanuatu. He's gone through
yeah,
the Fiji Airways business. Early stage incubation as an early career accountant. His boss, Shane Hussein, also very senior, cut his teeth at Fiji Airways, and so many others. So I think that value of having a large business champion to not only deliver the services that it does, but also to incubate an incredible talent pool of business people. Just the that incubation effect is one that people may not appreciate as well. Fiji
yeah.
Airways, incredible success story. It's had rightly a lot of government assistance. It's also got a substantial shareholding from Qantas as well. So it's really it's well capitalized and supported. It's got high quality leadership within the organization.
Hey, we've talked about some of the kind of positive numbers and the positive side of people movement. I think, one of the things that's come out of the woodwork recently, which is probably a little bit more worrying, is this US visa bond thing, and I guess particularly because it affects what is the B1 visa, which is the business visa to the US. And they're now, I think it's temporary announcement, but it's being applied or will be applied to Fiji, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Just wondering about your thoughts around that, Dave, and if you've heard sort of picked up any comments on the ground from people and business people in particular about how they see that and whether it's going to impact, I suppose, even short-term things like conference attendance and training opportunities and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it's one to watch, Glenn. I haven't picked up any specific comment on it from our friends in the business community across the Pacific just yet. There's obviously been a heck of a lot discussed in the media, and some of the more widely covered factors around the impact that it has on people going to study and to live in the US. And if you think about it, there are some huge Pacific diaspora populations in the United States, whether that's Hawaii or the West Coast or even over in Florida. Big populations of Fijian, Tongan, many other Pacific diaspora populations there, and so their ability to kind of go to connect with friends and whānau and to study and to work and earn and send some of those remittances back is going to be impacted by this. The business visa is going to be an interesting dilemma for some. There's certainly been a growing trade in and with the US from out of the Pacific. It's one of the target, strategic source markets for a lot of their tourism promotion. But also, I think you've been seeing over the last few years certainly a lot of growth around the construction industry, and particularly some of the inflows and outflows driven by organizations like the Mormon Church. The Latter-day Saints obviously have a big religious presence across the Pacific and headquartered out of Utah, but also significantly out of Hawaii. And I think the flows of people going back and forth for faith-based reasons, for educational reasons, but also for business reasons, will undoubtedly be affected by that. But like everything kind of happening in the US, it's kind of a day by day and a week by week thing at the moment, really, isn't it? So one to keep an eye on, and certainly I'd be really interested in feedback from our listeners, I guess, Glenn? If people are sort of experiencing through their business operations.
That would be great. It'd be great to hear what people are thinking about it, if it is actually having an impact, or if, as you say, it's just really something for now to keep an eye on, and where it actually goes, who knows?
Yeah, we should plug our email address.
Maybe we should, which is
2.palangi@gmail.com. So we've been getting some great feedback, by WhatsApp and through LinkedIn and various other kind of places where people know how to find us. So we thought we might as well start a Gmail address. And so if anyone's got some thoughts or suggestions, or just keen to let us know how they're finding the show, or other things I'd like us to cover, you can email us at 2.palangi, PALAGI, @gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you.
great plug. Before we close up, Dave, it would be remiss of me not to just talk a little bit about the date that's been set for the New Zealand election. I know we're a business podcast, but politics do play a part in business. So this week, Prime Minister Luxon did announce that the New Zealand general election will be held on November 7, which gives us 290 days to get ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, Glenn, me forgetting to mention the New Zealand election, a couple of shows ago when we were talking about upcoming elections in the Pacific, we've definitely now covered in detail the fact that the New Zealand election is coming up and is happening. And of course, the Pacific will undoubtedly feature strongly in that. You've seen, we've seen our Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, traveling around the Pacific just this week. He's visited Kiribati and Palau. Palau, of course, hosting the Pacific Island Forum leaders meeting this year, and all of the other associated leaders meetings. So having a fantastic connection with President Sarangal Whips up there, and then transiting back through Fiji just earlier this week. So extremely active travel schedule as ever for the Foreign Minister, but undoubtedly I think you'll see more Pacific business related announcements to come in the months ahead.
Excellent. So, Dave, that is us for the week. That's a wrap. That's 2 Palangi and a Pisinisi pod for another week. And before we close, though, we did get some rather exciting data this week. So I'd just like to hand to you to perhaps mention that.
That's right, Glenn. I think, we can confidently say that we've made it. What Glenn's referring to, for those that aren't aware, is that we've been told the great news that we are now the number 2 management and business podcast in Afghanistan. So we've really made it over there. And I thought, as you know, Glenn, I can't resist a trade stat, and so I thought, wow, I wonder who's listening to us in Afghanistan, and I should probably have a bit better an idea what our trade's like. And I looked it up, and bit of a trivia question for you. What do you think is the most well traded item between New Zealand and Afghanistan?
Onions.
Close. It's a fruit. Apparently, it's table grapes. So in the year to September 2025, New Zealand imported about $500,000 worth of table grapes, followed by $40,000 worth of pneumatic machinery, and strong trade balance actually in Afghanistan's favour. We don't export a lot to Afghanistan, but we're buying a bit. So they're certainly doing well on the trade balance
for exporters. The other good news, of course, is we were confirmed as number 1 in Fiji. So,
Yeah, that's right. So much more relevantly, we're also delighted to see that we are the number 1, apparently, business-focused podcast in Fiji, which is just an awesome metric. I see that you are actually wearing your Drua rugby shirt today. So fantastic interview with our good friend Joe last week, and awesome to see just how well he's doing at such a great sports team and organisation like the Drua.
All right, Dave, on that note, I'll let you close us out for the week if you wouldn't mind.
I certainly would not mind. Thank you very much once again. Malo Alpito to everybody who's been tuning in. Please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends, and please do keep in touch. This has been 2 Palangi and a Pisinisi pod for the week ending 23 January.